These experiences began on my family's farm in South Texas in the late 80s, early 90s. I was around 8 to 10 years old when this began. My initial memory of the exact time frame is a bit skewed due to my age at the time, but the majority of the details of the experience itself is clear as day in my memory. At this time in my life, I knew nothing about aliens or abductions or any of that. I had seen science fiction, Star Wars and E.T., but I didn't make any correlation between what I experienced and the fantastical creatures depicted in such films. At the time, it wasn't something I was really into. I didn't gain an interest or really a knowledge of extraterrestrials and ufology until a few years later, at 12 to 13 years old. Perhaps it was my experience that solidified the yearning to find out more. The farm itself is situated on 200 acres, 3/4 of which is open fields and the rest being a mix of pasture and lightly forested areas with a small creek that runs through the center of the property. These areas are divided up into paddocks separated by barbed wire and electrical fences. There are 3 houses sitting on 1 acre each, adjacent to each other in a row, east to west, on a small hill in the front northern corner of the property. I live with my immediate family in the middle house, with my uncle and great-grandparents, still alive at the time, homes on either side respectively. My grandparents' homes sit at the end of the row going towards the rest of the property. There are a few barns and various outbuildings situated at the end of the row on another acre. All told, the residential portion of the property is about 4 acres on said hill, overlooking the rest of the property. This will be relevant as I describe directions and such. It was late evening at the tail end of summer, early August, as I hadn't started school yet. It must have been after 11:30 or midnight because the adults in my family at the time were older and went to sleep right after the 10 p.m. newscast, Central Time Zone. I typically would have a bedtime of 9 p.m. Naturally, I would stay up much later, reading books or watching my TV with the brightness and sound turned down. I was not asleep, so there was no chance this was a dream or some kind of sleep paralysis. Also, another family member witnessed me awake in the house directly after this event. Either way, after I was sure the adults had gone to bed, I went to the kitchen to get a drink of water. As I was standing at the kitchen sink, I looked out the window and noticed a bright orange glow at the bottom of the hill to the southwest. We had a barn fire the previous year, so I thought maybe there was another fire, but there was no smoke cloud or smell of smoke. Curious. So I walked out of the kitchen into the adjacent hallway to the back door. I went outside to see what was going on before I ran around waking anybody up. Immediately, I remember that my dogs didn't come running out from under the porch to greet me. They didn't even come out and follow as I'm walking through the yard. As I'm making my way through the backyard, it was eerily quiet. No cicadas, no crickets or any night sounds you would expect. I don't think I realized it at the time, but in hindsight it definitely stands out in my mind. I walked to the back edge of our acre towards the light. I was almost compelled to keep walking towards this anomaly. I hop over the fence to my great-grandparents' yard and to the back fence at the edge of the top of the hill. I hoisted myself up the top of the fence, and what I saw, I won't ever forget. The creek runs through at the bottom of the hill. On the other side sat a small egg-shaped craft standing upright. The front of the craft had a large oval-shaped hatch that was open. The orange glow was emanating from inside the craft, but the light spilled out and enveloped the craft and surrounding area. I remember the light was pulsating out in a kind of corona, like looking at a street light when you have water in your eyes. The craft itself was a silver metallic color, but it was matte, not shiny, and it didn't actually reflect any of the light like you would expect. It was maybe about 10 to 12 feet tall and perhaps just as wide around at the bottom, tapering to an area maybe 3 feet in circumference at the rounded top of the egg. It was held upright about 6 inches off the ground by what I assume was a tripod of metal legs, which for the life of me I remember coming straight out of the lower sides of the craft, but not out of obvious ports like an aircraft. They were only maybe a foot in length. There was no other lights that I could recall on the outside. The only source of light was coming through the hatch. In hindsight, The craft itself reminds me of a drop pod or something like you see in sci-fi movies. Definitely didn't strike me as something you would use for regular travel. As I'm sitting there watching, a small being about 3.5 feet tall is outlined as a black-lit shadow in the doorway. It exits the craft and begins what looks to me like taking samples of soil or plant life, then turning around and going back inside. He did this a couple of times as I'm watching from the top of the hill. It did not seem to notice me. Now here's where it gets somewhat weird in my mind. The creature at first looked like a kind of, and I'm serious now, it looked like an Ewok, but without clothing. It was small and furry from the distance I was observing it. I was on that fence watching this creature do his work for about 2 minutes more or less. At some point, I decided to jump down and start walking down the hill to get closer. I remember being more excited than scared because, in my young mind, this is like something I had seen on TV come to life, and I was the only one to be witnessing it. So I make my way down the hill and suddenly I'm aware of something off to the right, back over my shoulder. It's the whoosh sound of something running up behind me from the other side of the fence. I turn to look back, and as I did, the sound of a crash of tin metal rings out into the night. I realized quickly that something had just run through a gap in the fence by the gate that my uncle had plugged up with a sheet of tin metal. I see a blur rush past me, and I turn to follow it as it runs incredibly fast past me down the hill to the craft. The other being looks up the hill in my direction and then turns to scurry into the craft as the other one gets to him. I begin running down the hill trying to catch up to them. Here my memory kind of jumps, and I'm standing on the other side of the creek in front of the craft, staring at the open hatch. One of the creatures steps out. At this point he looks like the furry Ewok-like creature, but then this fuzzy shell dissipates, and standing in front of me is what could be best described as a short gray. One thing I should point out is that it didn't look precisely the way you see presented in most pop culture and media. The head was large, but not the rigid angular teardrop shape. Rather, it was like a human head, just a little more bulbous. It reminded me a bit like the Watcher from the Marvel comics, but really more like an oversized embryo head. The eyes were large and human-like, but not pointed edges like in popular depictions. They were reminiscent of eyes like a sugar glider, nocturnal eyes and not completely black. They just had very large pupils that are dilated to let in as much light as possible. This is as best I can describe them, and to me it makes logical sense because they operate mostly in the dark. It had small slits for nostrils and a bump of a nose, a small mouth but no teeth that I could discern. It opened its mouth but not to speak any words. Its body was small and a slight build, much like you see in media depictions. The only thing I can say is that they look very light and fragile, and their movements are very fluid and methodical. Long arms, long fingers, very thin legs and small feet that are split in the center like ninja shoes. It wore a full tight bodysuit that was form-fitting and made of a dark, very dark gray or very dark navy material that had kind of a faint metallic sparkle in it, but it didn't absorb or reflect light. They had 5 skinny fingers. The one outside the craft had gloves on, but the other one did not. He may have taken them off as the one outside did later on. They both had on standard military-style boots, no laces, that again were split like ninja shoes. As the furry form dissipated, it seemed intrigued by my reaction that I could see it in its true form. I know now that it was most likely observing my subconscious thoughts and tried to disguise itself as this Ewok in order to either mislead me into thinking I imagined it or lure me into a false sense of security so I wouldn't be afraid. Either way, I was not afraid, and I actually waved at it and said hello. When I spoke, the other entity leaned back out of the hatch and looked at me, and the one on the ground smiled and looked back at his partner. They began making what sounded to me like light chirping or clicking sounds. They seemed to be having a brief conversation about the fact that I could see their true forms. I wasn't freaking out and what to do with me. The one inside the craft didn't seem too keen on me being there. He seemed a little freaked out that I had shown up, and judging from the way he bolted down that hill, I can't say I blame him. Either way, the one on the ground must have convinced him to let me hang around a bit, because he basically just kind of went, "All right, whatever you say, but you deal with it and don't say I didn't tell you so if he starts freaking out." Kind of comical and humanizing when you think about it. So he comes towards me and tells me, "Hello." This was done telepathically, as I realized later, but at the time I really didn't notice it was telepathy, as I spoke to him with my actual physical voice, but his voice was in my mind, but still seemed no different than if you or I were talking at the dinner table. Kind of hard to explain that, so I hope it makes sense. I asked him what they were doing out here. He told me they were taking samples. I asked him where they were from, and he told me they had come from far away, but are closer than we think. He said they visit often and keep an eye on things. He told me they were on a research mission. I asked him if I could help. He hesitated a bit, then said sure. He turned back to the craft for a moment and came back with a cylinder and a small metal tube. He kneeled down and motioned for me to come closer, and I did. He took the small metal tube and presses the bottom sides. The end of the tube opened like a bird's beak. He scooped up a bit of soil from the ground and the tube snapped shut. He then took the cylinder and I noticed there are some holes at the top. He slides the tube into one of the holes and it clicked into place. He produces another metal tube and opens the end and hands it to me. I do the same as he did and I try to close it, but can't find the mechanism on the sides to make it close. He seems amused by this and I handed it to him. He tells me it only works for them, and he snaps it shut and places it in the cylinder. We do this a few more times, me scooping the dirt and him closing the tubes and placing them in the holes until we fill the cylinder. As he is placing things back in the craft, I begin looking around for other things I think he would be interested in. I hand him a few stones that had flint in them and tell them they're my favorite kind. I pull up a couple of plants and tell him a bit more about them from what I knew. He seemed above it all, but being that I was a child, he humored me anyway. I tell him that I'm good at catching frogs and crawfish from the creek and asked him if he would like one. He said that they don't take biological specimens and that wasn't their department. They were looking for elements. I should mention at this point that where they had landed was on top of an area where, the previous year, my uncle had buried some of the scrap and debris from the barn fire. There were also some old refrigerators and other metal things buried there over the years. It was a bit of a mini landfill. The dirt in that area was still somewhat barren and freshly dug. I believe this is what might have brought them to this specific spot, a high concentration of metal under the ground. This entire bit of time while we were taking samples was probably about 30 to 45 minutes. After we finished, I asked if I could see inside. He said I could have a look, but there wasn't much to see. He told me that there is a much bigger ship waiting for them, and he pointed up into the sky. He turned and stepped up into the craft. I started to take a step up, and the other one stopped me. The first one told me to just look, but don't come all the way in and don't touch anything. I leaned in from the doorway and craned my neck around to see as much as I could. Inside, the craft seemed larger than it appeared on the outside, but not by much. Of course, this is all relative to our size, and I was a child at the time. The walls were stark white and concave, matching the egg-shaped exterior. I looked up to the ceiling and noticed where the light was coming from. The round center of the ceiling was just brightly glowing with a golden-orange light. It was blinding if I looked too long, but the interior was much more dim than the bright glow outside would lead you to believe. There was a kind of low, shallow shelf around the central edge of the walls. There were recesses in the shelf which contained the sample canisters. There were also some cube containers which I assume contained larger samples of things, but we never used them, so I'm not sure. To one side, the shelf bulged out, and there was a kind of control panel with two seats, like small bucket seats next to each other, each perched on a single pedestal. There were no buttons or switches or anything on the panel, but what is most intriguing is that there were flat touchscreen panels, much like the tablets we use today. There were symbols and things on the panel screens, but for the life of me, I couldn't reproduce them if I tried. Directly above this control panel was a bit of a recessed area flatter to the wall but a little darker than the rest of the wall. This was a type of port or window to see out of the craft. This window was a strip about a foot high and 3 feet across. The first entity places his finger to a touchscreen and the window popped open and I could see out. It didn't appear to be visible from the exterior of the craft. I kind of exclaimed, "Wow," and then it popped closed again. At this point, the first one tells me that it is time for them to be going, and they have already taken too long and will most likely be reprimanded for letting me help them. I asked him if I could come along with them. He tells me that they cannot do that at this time. They are not allowed to bring back biological specimens, repeating what he said before. Besides, I would not be able to survive for long and they had no nourishment for me. I remember asking him what nourishment means and he told me they had nothing for me to eat. I told him I can go back home and make a snack. He said I would need more food than that. I told him I liked pizza and we could go get some. He seemed to find my insistence humorous, but his partner seemed to be getting annoyed, and he told me it wasn't possible and that he will take me home. The next thing I remember is that we are both back in the hallway of my house, standing just inside the back door. The entity tells me thank you for my assistance, and that I was a good helper. I asked him if he would be back for me. He said that right now I was too young. Maybe in a few years they would be back. Being stubborn, I told him I really wanted to go. He said just wait and then told me to hurry along. He really needed to leave because they can't stay here for too long in our environment. He actually said atmosphere, but when I asked him what that was, he said something about the air and climate, but I didn't comprehend these things at the time. He just seemed to get very anxious about being in my house. Then he backed up and just phased out of the house directly through the back door. I turned around to go back out the hall to my room. Just then, one of my uncles who was staying with us at the time opens the door to his room adjacent to mine and asked me what I was doing up. I told him I was getting a drink of water and I began to tell him about helping this little man I met in the backyard. He groggily tells me that I left the light on in the kitchen and to go back to bed. It's 3:30 in the morning. Then he slams his door shut and goes back to bed. I go to the kitchen to turn off the light, but the light isn't on. The glow from the craft is still shining in from outside. I watch out the window for a bit and after a few moments the light fades out and I see a greenish-white bolt of light shoot up into the sky from below the hill. It's dark again, and I turn around and head back to my room. I didn't sleep the rest of the night and waited till the sun came up. In the days following, I tried telling my family about what I saw, but no one seemed to believe me, of course. My uncle told me that he had seen me awake that night and thinks I went outside again. Back then, I would sometimes sneak outside and play with the dogs or stargaze and stuff. My parents just told me to stay inside, something about the boogeyman, blah blah blah, the usual parental stuff about not going outside late at night. The only one in my family that ever believed me was my late grandmother. She told me that she had seen them before, but she told me they were angels. She was a very religious person and toward the end of her life would talk about seeing angels and would always have a collection of angel knickknacks. As I got older and had a few more encounters with these beings, I would discuss them with her, but she always referred to them as angels. I also spent a lot of time going back to the landing site looking for any clues. It retained this kind of charged air around the area for quite some time after the event. The cows typically avoided this area as well. My uncle set up a feeding pen near it for a while, but he had to move it since the cows wouldn't touch it and the hay kept rotting. Incidentally, he got a mule a few years back, and anytime he is in that particular paddock, he'll stand some ways off from that patch of ground and bray in that direction. If you try to lead him over to it or near it, he'll resist and kick back, so I didn't bother attempting that again. This particular uncle hasn't heard my story. My cousin has also found a few cattle and goats mutilated on the property over the years, but never in this particular paddock. Very strange indeed. I've had a handful of encounters with what I wholeheartedly believe were extraterrestrial beings. I would learn more about them not only from books and media, but also directly from the entities themselves. As I said, If anyone has taken the time to read this whole post and is interested in hearing more about my experience, I'm happy to share. I am now in my mid-30s. I no longer live on the farm, but I do visit often. Whenever I think about it, I go to that spot by the creek and look for signs that they have returned and try to see if they left anything behind. So far, I just have the memories of my experiences. Needless to say, I'm still skeptical, but I am more of a believer now. I'm a very logical and practical person. I don't like bullshit. I even hate the idea of the supernatural or aliens. I don't even watch fantastical movies or read fiction generally. I will explain what happens simply in the clearest way possible and let you decide. I don't care if you believe it, because I am very clearly saying that I don't know if I should believe it either. This happened about a week ago. I needed some time to think about this stuff first. I'm somewhat of a panicky person, and so therefore I needed to cool down for a while before I could write anything. I was driving home as usual from work at night. It was around 11:45 p.m., and it's around this time that there aren't many people on the roads anymore. I'm basically lost in my thoughts because it's a normal day and I'm just doing the normal routine. I see a red light and I'm stopping as usual. I stop, then I keep driving. A moment later, I come up to the exact light, the one that I had just passed. It was one of those things I heard about a long time ago. It's a phenomenon some people feel like they had just time warped. However, I thought nothing of it for the most part. Why? Because as I said, I wasn't paying super close attention, and maybe I just imagined it. I was like, whatever. In fact, I still don't know if this part is related to what happened next. And here's where it gets interesting though. I go to bed as usual. Nothing happened until then at all. I wake up around 3 a.m., get some water to drink, then go back to bed. I assume I fell asleep not too long after that. Literally moments, because it's easy to fall back asleep generally. It feels almost instantly as soon as I fall asleep. What happens I can only describe as a stereotypical waking up on an alien spacecraft. Just to be clear, I don't dream of aliens. In fact, I can say that I have never even had a dream about aliens. Monsters, sure. Weird shit, of course. But never aliens. I don't think about aliens ever, and I don't study them, and I just never cared. I have to make this point here. For me, there is very easily a difference between feeling like I am dreaming and reality. I wouldn't mix it up. I felt like I was not dreaming. I felt like I was in a waking reality this entire time. I wake up, and my arms are stretched out at a 90-degree angle from my body straight up. My wrists are bound by some kind of clear plastic-like material. I don't know if it's plastic actually, of course, but it certainly feels like it. It's transparent though, and clear. I see no aliens around me, and I'm completely alone. The room I would describe as fairly small. Interestingly enough, behind my head I feel padding, like I'm laying on some sort of gel-like material. Cold, but not very hard. Now, the way I feel at that time is almost like the feeling you have after you are sedated at the hospital. I feel cold generally too. I could feel a lot of things, but my head was just immobile. But the thing is, I wasn't thinking very clearly. I do feel strange. I do feel sedated, but again, I don't feel like I'm dreaming at all. Now here's the weird part. I'm laying there for literally minutes. It feels real. Time never passes this way in dreams. In dreams, something is always happening. Then I hear the sound that sounds like the sound when a door opens in the game Doom, the old one, except it's kind of a lower pitched and a hum sort of preceded it. Yes, dear readers, this is the point in the time where aliens walked in. They walked in fast, and I didn't hear footsteps. Perhaps the way they move isn't like us, but this is stuff I'm assuming after the experience after I had time to think about it. The next moment there is a twitchy alien looking down at me. Now he is moving really fast. Not just like his movements, but just it felt like his whole being was faster. It's almost impossible to explain. It's almost like I knew he was fast. Just not like I assumed it, The knowledge sort of entered my mind in a way such that it was a fact. The way it looked was, yes, almost like grays, the way people described them. The eyes were massive. Now since this, I have read a bunch of alien stories, and some people say I wasn't scared. I was absolutely terrified. I could see the detail on its skin, like it was one of those fake pictures, but just imagine it being the real thing right in front of you. Now there was one above me looking right at me, but there was at least a second one because I could feel him touching my body. Now you know how if you watch a fake alien somewhere, they move weird and blink like too slow to be convincing. This guy I could see like the microscopic movements that a living being was making. I could see like the tiny muscles in its face and such. Now it never blinked, and I don't think it had eyelids. These aliens that came in basically did something very quickly. It was only a few seconds, and I was staring at this dude, but they knocked me out. Now here's the next part. Usually I wake up at around 7:30 a.m., and I'm not a big sleeper. I woke up at noon. This has never happened before in my life as far as I can recall. Anyway, that's the story of my dream, or as I'm telling myself to feel sane. Thank you for reading, and I actually would love if you had any questions, and I do my best to answer them. I'm a 27-year-old male from Italy, but I moved to Argentina 6 years ago. Until now, I lived a pretty normal life with no particular paranormal experiences. The only non-negligible are those lived as a boy, when at night I heard an asexual voice whispering my name vehemently. Apart from that, I always studied, since I was 11, things such as UFO encounters, aliens, mysteries in general, and even things about occult. I never practiced anything, I just studied, and still do because I love it without any particular goals. Coming to the point, I'll report here when I wrote back in my diary back then. First case, day, 15th of September 2015. I don't remember what time it was, but it was night. Taking into account the external light, perhaps past 4 a.m. or almost 5. I'm dreaming. I'm in the plaza of my birth city walking carelessly. All of a sudden, a child in red and blue clothes approaches me, asking directions on a map he has. He explains that he would like to know where to hide because someone wants to kidnap him. He seems agitated, but he observes me carefully, almost waiting for a quick answer. I do not remember exactly what I say, except that kidnapping was a bad thing which shouldn't happen. No one should allow it. As I'm speaking to the child, I become aware that I was in a dream, just as it happens to people to realize at some point that you're just a spectator within a dream and you can stop yourself from doing such. When I'm realizing this, I feel my mouth biting something while the dream is ending. It's like biting aggressively something meat-made, holding it with the press of my jaw. So I wake up and I open my eyes. I'm belly up in my bed. To my left there is an alien with a large head and a lean body, not very tall, but I think almost low to medium stature, very similar to a gray but with ashen pink skin. His right arm is extended towards my blanket, and that's the limb I'm biting. The alien's expression is pained, his eyes, pure black, are squeezed, and immediately after that scene, I suffer a blackout. I wake up in the morning without remembering anything beyond this. Second case, day, 15th of December 2015. I don't remember what time it was in this too, but probably almost the same as the first case since the penumbra was similar. I was dreaming. I'm in a fairly extensive grassy field which I don't recognize, surrounded by woods in the distance. I'm not alone, and I seem almost to be the lead of a multitude of people. I yell at them, pointing rapidly towards the woods to my right, saying loudly that they, can't stop them, the people who are running, and that many will be saved. Strangely enough, this is another dream that concerns some kind of kidnap abduction scenery. Here, as happened to me in September, I begin to understand that I'm in a dream and a spectator. This time around, I'm even aware that in waking me up, I would find next to my bed an alien. I did have this weird sensation of peril and adrenaline, the same I felt in September. So I wake up, I open my eyes. I have it behind me since I was laying with my left side to the bed. I move my head a bit to see part of his torso, almost defined and slender with some kind of abdominal muscles, not human-like, but still accented by the pale skin complexion and ashen. Seeing it, I immediately close my eyes, squeezing them. My body is undergoing internal shake, as if I were a bundle of nerves, almost if I was ready to burst into panic, an instinct of adrenaline, but I tried to resist the situation. I began to think about something relaxing, alienating myself, thinking about the simple things I would have done tomorrow. I tried to ignore the alien behind me and slowly tried to calm my body. At the same time I was trying this, I felt a light touch on my hair and a radio effect inside my right ear. It was like a radio disturbance with no channel. After a moment of confusion, I began to hear a voice, apathetic and without sex, weird, and it was talking. It was a language I didn't recognize. I didn't understand anything. It was this voice talking, accompanied by this radio interference. Then, again, I suffered a blackout. I woke up in the morning, as always, remembering just this. Third case, day, 15th of March 2016. It was night, surely, but I didn't have a chance to open my eyes and examine the light outside my window. It happened again, at this time in a less direct way. I don't remember the dream perfectly, but I was with other people in an urban environment at the side of a desert road. I don't remember why, but at some point we were controlled by a couple of people, and among them there was a policeman. I don't know why, but I thought upon seeing him, I know you're an alien behind human form. The policeman looked at me with surprise and marvelous expression, then with a malignant smirk, immediately sending me the same feeling I had in the past cases. A sense of peril, a weird feeling inside my body, almost a radar which tells me that there is something wrong near me. The same feeling I had when I found myself in contact with these beings prior. I don't remember anything else at this time. Just as the dream was ending, I blacked out without opening my eyes again. I have no idea what I experienced in the middle of the night. I know the difference between reality and the dream world, and this actually happened. If anybody has any similar experiences or answers, please tell me. Smithfield, Rhode Island, July 20th, 1992. My friend and I were finishing in an evening-friendly bass tournament. Between 3 and 9 p.m., we were at the Smith & Sales Reservoir. The fishing picked up as the tournament ended, so I convinced my friend to go back out for a night bite. Somewhere around 11 p.m., we were fishing at the end of a peninsula facing the shore with a dark, empty house on the land. It was very quiet, but I thought a helicopter was coming down in the cove behind the house where we couldn't see, but no noise. I gestured to my friend, but when the lights dimmed, we excused it as a vehicle's lights must have come down the road and backed away, but we never saw a vehicle. We continued fishing towards the shore in plain view of the house when I noticed what looked like children playing with flashlights moving frantically in one of the rooms of the house through the windows. My fishing partner and I decided people must have come home to the house, even though we never saw a car or people, and the power must have been turned off in the house. We continued fishing, and almost immediately, although we never saw or heard anyone, there was an abnormally tall human-shaped figure with a small child-sized human-shaped figure with the larger one looking like it was holding a flashlight, looking for frogs and such at the water's edge. The odd thing was the way that they were illuminating, almost like glow-in-the-dark. But we dismissed that as the flashlights reflecting off the water back at them strangely. Just then, we noticed about 15 to 20 glowing-shaped figures all on the shore facing us, all different sizes, and we got freaked out because there was never any noise this whole time, and we were close enough to have heard people walking in the brush near the shore. Just as we were getting scared and contemplating leaving, the flashlight the first big human-like figure was holding shined directly towards our boat. My partner said to start the motor and let's get out of here, as I started to set the choke and pull the cord of the small 5-horsepower outboard motor. The flashlight levitated across the 30 to 40 yards of water as I was keeping half an eye on it and starting the motor. When it turned over and I put it in gear, I looked up and the light was about 8 feet above our small boat. I never looked back, and it was a short 3-minute ride back to the boat ramp. We hurried, throwing the boat in the van, and got inside the van in shock. All the dogs on the lake were barking loudly. We never heard a dog before this. My friend made me promise not to tell anyone, and I haven't, until now. First, I will state that I have never been interested in aliens or UFOs. I've honestly always been pretty scared of the whole thing. I remember seeing signs when I was 12, and it literally terrified me for weeks, but I thought of this phenomena as science fiction until I experienced something that I presume most of you won't believe, and that's fine. I'm submitting my story here because I haven't talked to anyone about it at all, and I just feel the need to put it out there. 3 months ago, I was camping with a friend in a very remote part of Northern California. I'm a massive wilderness junkie. I've been camping all my life, and I spent much of my free time hiking, rock climbing, hunting, etc. A buddy of mine that also enjoys the outdoors wanted to head up to the Sierras for a weekend and asked me to go with him. It was our second night, and we were sitting up by the fire. We weren't staying at a campsite. We had hiked about 10 miles from our cars to a clearing with a beautiful view. He had stayed here once before. It was around 10 p.m., and we ate some food and were just checking out the stars. He was tired and went to sleep in his tent. I wanted to stay up for a while, and about 45 minutes after he went to bed, I saw this object coming up from the valley below. It was a basic flying saucer shape with multiple circular lights rotating around the edges that changed colors over and over again. I was absolutely shocked. I watched it for maybe 15 seconds, then decided I had to wake him up so he could see it and wouldn't think I was crazy. I stood, and when I looked back towards it, the thing was gone. I called out his name, and that's when everything got really messed up. I didn't hear my own voice when called out. Everything was completely silent. I could move my eyes around, but couldn't move my body. I remember seeing the fire had completely frozen. Everything looked like a picture, like time itself had stopped. Then there was a flash of light, and I blacked out. I woke up later just as the sun was starting to rise. I was outside laying in the dirt, shivering next to the fire that had long gone out. I felt like I had been drugged, totally in this haze. I sluggishly yelled out his name a couple of times, and he came out of the tent. He was really confused, to say the least. I tried to explain what had happened, but my memory was really foggy and I just couldn't articulate it. We left within 30 minutes. I was totally silent on the car ride back, falling in and out of sleep for 7 hours. He dropped me off at my house and I passed out for basically an entire day. A few weeks later, I was messing around with an amp and it released this static ooh sound when I unplugged my guitar. For some reason, the sound somehow triggered my memory, and I remembered everything. When I came back into consciousness, I was suspended laterally in this circular mechanism in a position very similar to Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. These clear glass-like shackle-type restraints were holding me in place. I was completely nude, and standing above me were your 3 typical grays. They were around 4 feet tall and were wearing white spandex-like suits. 2 were just standing there observing the other, who were extracting blood from a vein under my armpit with this weird-looking syringe. Although they didn't show a real reaction, I could just tell that they were surprised when I was awake. I couldn't move at all except for my eyes and lips. I was also terrified, in a sort of fight-or-flight mode, my heart pounding from an influx of adrenaline. I can't even begin to tell you how scared I was, but I also felt totally enraged. I wanted to kill them, wanted to rip out this device and completely destroy them. My brain went totally primal, just animal instinct, and I could tell that they could all sense my anger because they all stepped back simultaneously. I'm 6'3", 185 pounds, and I was hoping I looked as threatening as possible, which is silly because I was totally paralyzed and therefore completely harmless. Two of them disappeared from my view and presumably left the room. The other one was just staring at me, void of any emotion. I wanted so badly just to shut my eyes, but I forced myself to just stare right back at it, trying my hardest not to blink. Then the two grays came back, and now they weren't alone. I honestly couldn't believe my eyes. Standing behind them were two very tall, very human-looking beings, a male and female that looked like Norse gods. They both had bright golden hair and massive eyes. The males were dark blue and females were violet. I suppose that they were what the UF community refers to as Nordics. This was quite bizarre to me. My family descended from Sweden, and I am very Nordic looking, blonde hair, blue eyes, the works. I know this is cliché, but I heard a feminine voice in my mind. For some reason I couldn't understand what she was telling me, although it wasn't like she was saying anything in English. It's really hard to explain, but I just knew. She told me something like, "Be calm. You are not in danger." I relaxed and asked her what they wanted with me. She said that they were just checking up on me. I practically blacked out after hearing that. I asked her what she meant. She said that they had saved me when I first came into being. I immediately knew exactly what she was talking about. I was born practically 2 months premature. My mother was horribly sick during labor. We both had fevers of 104. The strange thing is, the doctors had absolutely no idea what was wrong with us. I was given 2 spinal taps. My mother was given 3. I spent 4 nights in that bubble housing ICU thing. There was a decent chance I was going to die. Then one day I started getting better and made a full recovery. The doctors were very worried that the whole ordeal might have permanently damaged my body and possibly my brain, but I was totally fine. I asked her, "Why did you save me?" This time I heard a deep male voice stating that this is a conversation for another time. I asked him if they were human. He said no. I was confused considering they looked quite human. I asked him if man had come from them. He said yes, that they had come here 200,000 years ago and created mankind by combining their DNA with that of our primate ancestors. I wanted to know why they looked especially similar to me more than other humans. He stated that many males of their kind found female humans attractive and mated with them. This directly passed on some of their physical features to Nordic peoples. I wanted to know more, but they declined and said it was time for me to go back. I blacked out instantly and woke up by the extinguished campfire, clothes on and shivering. I understand this sounds absolutely ridiculous and very impossible, but it happened. I don't know what to do. I've been completely lost since the encounter, but I already feel a bit of relief after submitting my story. Feel free to ask any questions, and I will answer them to the best of my ability. I've been looking into a lot of theories on alien-human links practically day and night since this happened, and I am interested in discussing it. I will not fluff up any memories with the typical nonsense I see or read about. There is no anal probing or examination tables or bright lights sucking me up into flying saucers. Those things just didn't happen, at least that I can remember. Throughout these memories, I will use bang to describe the sudden and uncontrollable loss of consciousness. This is what it felt like anyways. Bang. Ages 3 or 4, 1972 to 1973. My memories of the events that took place at this age are very vague and have lost much detail over the years, but even now, over 40 years later, I still remember some things very clearly. These events aren't necessarily in chronological order. I know this age range is correct because I lived in a small mountain town until my family moved to a different home in the city when I turned 5. I frequently had dreams, or at least I think they were dreams, of several people standing at the end of my bed, usually 4 or 5 in a tight group. I do remember they had dramatically varying heights and always stood motionless and were tiered with the shortest in front, like a family waiting for the photographer to finally take the picture. I never could see their faces, nor do I remember what clothes they were wearing or even if they were wearing clothes. I would stare at them, and they would stare at me. These dreams always ended with a loud sound like the crash of something breaking, forcing me to look away and toward the noise, only to instantly wake up in the morning. At night, I was always frightened of the people in the hallway. I can't elaborate more on this. I was just 3 or 4 years old, and this very well could have been just a common monster under my bed childhood fear. I do clearly remember one night desperately trying to wake up my older brother. I was screaming at him to help and to wake up, shaking his arm and shoulder. He just wouldn't wake up even though I tried just as fiercely as a 4-year-old could. Bang! I was standing in the hallway crying. The hall light was on and I was wearing dingy yellow one-piece pajamas. They had one long zipper from the neck down to my left ankle and had cheap plastic soles for the footies. Why do I remember what I was wearing? I don't know, but it's a very clear memory. My parents came out and comforted me with the cliche, "It was just a dream, now go back to bed." This final memory from this age may not be related, but is very clear and has stuck with me. I was playing underneath my father's wood desk in the living room. I'm not sure what time it was, but it was certainly during the day. I don't remember what I was playing or doing exactly, but I was having the time of my life as any 4-year-old should while under a desk. Across the room and within my view from a desk fort was a life-size wooden carving of an owl standing on a tree stump. My mom had several owl figurines and other owl decorations around the house. I looked at it and it turned its head towards me. That's all I can remember of it. What? Why would I have this vivid memory? Was it a true hallucination or just a highly active imagination of a child? Ages 5 to 14, 1974 to 1983. These memories are just as vague but clearly different from my earlier memories. I began to see more detail, and most of the time I was awake and sometimes not even in bed. Again, these may not have been in chronological order, but I'll do my best. My family is now living in a nice middle-class home in a major city. My brother and I still shared a room, but that was fine by me. He was my big brother after all. Very big in fact, as he is 13 years older than me. He was usually nice to me and treated me well, but because of our huge age difference, we never bonded quite the same as brothers and sisters should. I still looked up to him no matter what. The dreams of the people at the end of my bed continue, exactly the same, over and over for years. Not nightly, but often enough that I would become fearful of sleeping. When I was in school, 1st grade I believe, we were tasked with drawing something that we were most frightened of. I drew myself laying in bed with a face looking in my window. This drawing was your typical stick figure drawing only a 5-year-old could muster. I don't have to describe what the face in the window looked like. I don't remember any incident or event that caused me to draw it. I just drew it. As was expected, I brought home all my schoolwork and went over every scrap of it with my mom. As was also expected, most of it was met with a half-interested but feigning interest so I look like I really care about 1st grade schoolwork. That's nice, sweetie. What I wasn't aware of at first was that my mother kept that drawing for years. She never kept any other art or work I would bring home. Why that one? I remember seeing it dozens of times over the years in the desk or in the filing cabinet up until I was in my late teens. One day it was just gone. I never did find out if she eventually threw it out or just hid it better. I did ask several questions about the drawing, and strangely she always remembered it, but would say she didn't know where it was and would change the subject. My brother joined the army and my father was furious. The Vietnam War. While the war was nearly over, it was still on the minds of my father's generation. I think my dad was so angry because he himself was in the army for a time and clearly knew about war. He didn't want to lose a son. I didn't understand what was going on until the day my brother packed his things and left. I was now alone in my room for the first time in my life. My parents hosted a small gathering of their friends to play pinochle and have some drinks and laughs. These gatherings were infrequent but not unheard of. Often they would spill out into the backyard because nobody in my family smokes, but a couple of my dad's friends did. I would take the opportunity to run around the backyard late at night. The cool, damp grass felt amazing under my feet. I basically played a form of hide-and-seek by myself. I would run and hide behind a bush or tree and just stand there for a moment giggling, then run to the next great spot. Yes, I was easily entertained, and still am. One large bush proved to be a nice spot because it was just out of range of the porch light, but close enough that I could hear my father and his friends talking and laughing. I stood behind that bush and looked into the branches and leaves, only to have a face turn and look back at me from about a foot away. Yes, that face. This is the first time I can remember seeing that face with such detail. Those eyes were so deep and black, not shiny or reflective at all, just black. There were no eyelids that I could make out. The head is slightly slimmer and taller than what I've seen people typically draw. I don't remember any other details about the nose, mouth, or ears, just those eyes. I screamed and ran to the porch and burst into tears telling my father about the face. He laughed, and just to humor me, he grabbed a flashlight and went to the bush to have a look. He laughed harder and asked me to come and take a look. I was frightened, but I trusted him. It was a caterpillar. No freaking way what I saw was a caterpillar. No freaking way, no. I was so crippled with fear of the dark and sleep that I was physically sick for years. I was so emotionally drained daily that I became socially stunted and had only one friend throughout my grade school years. I was bullied. No, tortured every single day in school. I was tripped, kicked, pushed, knocked down, books thrown, personal belongings stolen or broken, hair pulled, ears flicked, kicked in the balls, stabbed with pencils, and verbally abused all day from 3rd grade until 8th grade. I'm sure I left most things out. I try to forget this period the best I can. I try to get help from teachers and my parents, but was always told not to fight and to turn the other cheek. I couldn't have defended myself even if I wanted to. I just didn't have the strength or desire because I couldn't really sleep at night. By this time in my life, I was crying myself to sleep most nights, into my pillow and as quietly as possible. And everything was my fault, and I just didn't want to raise any questions. Just be quiet, I told myself. I became interested in electronics and computers and any technology at all. I would take old radios or TVs or just about anything I could get my hands on and tear them apart. I would even desolder all of the electronic components from the boards in the hopes that I could use the parts again in my own designs. One night after a round of burning my fingers and ruining components with a cheap Radio Shack soldering iron, I went to bed. Something shook me awake, like literally shook me awake, and I heard a voice say, "It's hot." The voice was deep and monotone, not robotic, but not normal either. Imagine Morgan Freeman saying it with no emotion and clean, perfect timing. "It's hot." I could feel the adrenaline start pumping from fear. What? Who? Oh shit. I shot out of bed and ran to my desk to unplug the soldering iron, which was now laying on the floor. Why was it on the floor? I know I had it on the stand. I unplugged it and put it in the stand and began to cry. There it was, a huge hole in the carpet where the soldering iron burned through. Damn it. I was forbidden to use soldering irons for months. My father became quite annoyed one night that I would keep my room light on all night and forbade me from having it on after bedtime. I was far too embarrassed to ask for a night light. I did the next best thing and wired an old-fashioned toggle switch into my floor lamp's power cord. This was so I could keep the light off until I couldn't bear it anymore and had to click the light on to take a quick look. I held that power switch very tightly in my hand every night with my thumb on the toggle, just waiting. As a note, this is very dangerous because I was holding the main line in my hand all night with nothing but a poorly wrapped wad of electrical tape around it. Don't do this. Not too long after my genius installation of a remote switch for the light, I dozed off, gripping it tightly, only to wake up later in the middle of the night. Standing next to my bed to my right was a small figure, perhaps 4 feet tall comparing to the height of my mattress. It looked humanoid, 2 arms, torso, head, the usual. I couldn't make out any details, only that there was a dark silhouette there. Where's that switch? I dropped it in my sleep. Looking down, I saw it lying on the mattress next to me. Grab it, thumb on the toggle. Bang. I woke up the next morning. There was nothing wrong with the switch and I wasn't electrocuted. I continued to use that switch for a couple of years after with no issues. I would frequently get nosebleeds for about a year, maybe once or twice a month. I think I was around 12 or 13 by this time. Everyone said iron deficiency. My friend would laugh at me and try to help me stop them with ridiculous home remedies. "Put a penny under your tongue," he'd say. What? They eventually stopped on their own. Related, I don't know. It happened and I remembered it. Not much happened after this time. The dreams continued though. The same dream. I was nearly used to them and almost expected them by this point. Age 15 to 18, 1984 to 1987, high school. The first few years of high school were generally okay. The bullying had calmed down to just verbal abuse and wasn't even a daily thing. I was sleeping a little better by this time, so I felt genuinely more healthy and happier overall. I actually had a couple of friends by my sophomore year and started to feel things were getting back on track. I met a girl in my junior year. Yes, a real live human girl. This was the happiest few months I have ever had. We did the typical high school dating thing at the time, watched TV together, went to the movies, went to the mall. She had some anger management issues though, but was probably better equipped mentally for life than I was. She was perfect and I loved her with all my heart. Even today I occasionally think of her and smile. 1987, the mall. I was walking with my girlfriend down the center public walkway in this mostly indoor shopping mall. I just stopped, frozen in fear. My body began to tremble and my heart was pounding in my chest and ears. Tears began rolling down my face. The mall and the world melted away from me except for what I was looking at. I saw a book displayed prominently in the window of a nearby bookstore. The book was the most frightening thing I have ever seen in my life. No, wait. I've seen that book cover before. Where? Oh yes, I remember. I've seen that in person. Looking at me from the bushes, next to my bed, through the window, and standing at the end of my bed in hundreds of dreams. The book was Whitley Strieber's Communion. I'm not going to look for it, but feel free to Google the original book cover of that book. It's not exactly the same as what I saw, but close enough. I had never seen that face anywhere else before. My girlfriend knew a little of my past, but just wasn't aware of how much seeing that face again would paralyze me with fear. She began dragging me away. Thank you. I just couldn't stand looking at it anymore, but I was frozen and unable to move. I must have looked so foolish standing in the mall staring at a book and crying my eyes out with my girlfriend tugging at my arm, yelling, "Let's go, let's go." I slowly began to deteriorate again. The dreams hadn't stopped for these years, but I was able to forget them so easily. Now they are clearly on my mind in the morning. Every time I happen to accidentally see that face, the memories of all those years flooded back to me. All the dreams, the face in the bush, the bullying, the years of crying myself to sleep. Damn it. Damn that book. Damn that face. I was so happy. Age 22 to 46, 1991 to 2015. I lost myself again, and lost my girlfriend. I trudged on for years avoiding people, avoiding anything social. Miraculously, I did find another girl that seemed to tolerate me and eventually had 2 children with her. Everything was generally okay. The occasional odd dream too vague to remember. The fear of the dark is still present, but I've learned to live with it. Eventually, I separated from the mother of my children and joined the army when I was 36. That's not an easy task at 36, but I did it. 4 years was enough. Bucket list item check. Damaged back for life check. I inherited a cat from my ex and actually thoroughly enjoyed her company. She was a good lap cat and would always come running for petting and treats when I called her name. 40 years old and sporting a top-of-the-line, energy-efficient and fully loaded nightlight. Yes, I finally got one. Age 47, 2016. This was just last year, and I remember it like watching a Blu-ray on a 4K monitor with Dolby 7.1 surround sound. Mostly, this will be my last entry in the most detail because it was still so clear in my mind. It has been years since I even had those dreams. I had to say about 15 years of peace. I'm still frightened of the dark, and I have had my bed pushed into the far corner of the room. I need those two walls to feel secure. I usually sleep with my head against one wall and my body against the other, tight in the corner. I also have to have a large bed, as if to put space between me and the rest of the room. Nightlight gallantly shining against the wall as if to shield me. Sometimes, thanks to my now bad back, I will flop around on the bed and change positions frequently when I'm watching a show or a movie on the television. When I am done watching, I will always move back into the corner and cover up for sleep. One night I happened to be lying with my head exposed to the room while watching television. I wasn't thinking about it and had forgotten the dreadful feeling I get when exposed like that. I fell asleep. Laying on my stomach in the prone position, I was half awakened to my hair being tugged. "Stop it," I said to my cat. I thought my cat was licking my hair or just poking at me. She did like to play around a lot. "Stop." I reached out to brush her away. Wait a minute. That's not fur. It feels like skin. I felt the arm for a moment and realized that's most definitely skin. So soft yet firm and tight against the thin arm. I looked up. There it was again, standing there with its arm in my hand. I stared at the face, but just couldn't see any detail. I could see the shape of the head, but nothing else. It was like watching a show where they blur out the face for anonymity. I tried for what seemed forever to finish waking up and focus in on the face. Then I thought, why am I trying to see this? I don't want to see it. Turned away and it will be over. Go back to sleep. These thoughts were my own, at least I think so. So I slowly turned away and put my head down and closed my eyes. I could feel a strange tingling throughout my body. Not again. Please, not again. Bang. I woke up the next morning. The memory of this event was carved into my mind with such great detail and precision that it almost felt like it was still happening. I panicked and looked around the room, now filled with morning light. Nothing. It was over. Within a month, my cat began to have breathing issues and would have seizures in her sleep. Why is this happening to my little kitty now? Is this related? Did that bastard do something to her? She battled it for almost 2 months and, unable to fight any longer, passed away, struggling to breathe. I comforted her and offered treats and bottled water constantly in those last days. She loved drinking bottled water right out of the bottle cap. Damn, I miss that cat. But now, I'm in my room, alone.